This is the oldest four-wheel vehicle in North America, probably. You know, whether it's dated 1898 or 1900, it's extremely old for a production vehicle running on fuel.
On this given day, it's unlikely that there's a vehicle anywhere in the world that's older than this that is going to be on the road today by coincidence. Unlikely. 1898 Jean Perrin. Vis-a-Vis, runabout, whatever you call it. It's a beautiful car. It's a single cylinder, and we're going to go terrorize the neighborhood.
This is a 1898 lamp.
Okay.
And what they did in 1896, in November, they had lamps, and you had to walk in front of your car with a lamp at night, or somebody had to walk in front of your car when it's running with a flag during the daytime. And your car wasn't a internal combustion car, it would be a steam or coal-powered car. But in November of 1896, Lord Montagu in England decided to get a lot of his royal people and do a race from London to Brighton with the 75 miles or so with their cars, automobiles, and their automobiles, most of them steam and coal-powered, and there were a few Didion butane explosion tricycles also in that event. And they wanted to have those 20 vehicles participate in an event to repeal that law. And that law, when it was repealed, that was the emancipation of that. So then it brought the speed limit from that 2 or 3 miles an hour with a person holding the lantern in front of you to a grand 15 mile an hour. And the 15 mile an hour speed limit stayed till about 1906. Well, this car is an 1898 car. And this lamp is a bale handle lamp, the same thing they would have used in 1896 and back, but this lamp is really modern, and it says 1898 on it, and this is considered an emancipation light. So even though it's still got the bale handle, so you could have it on when you're coming home, this bale handle would mount to your car and could stay on your car. It didn't have to be in someone's hand walking in front of you. Also, if you had your carbide lights, like this has carbide lights on the front, you would mix carbide pellets and water, and the carbide pellets and water would generate acetylene gas. So the acetylene gas would make this, after 4 or 5 minutes of being on, a really nice bright headlight. It'd be the same thing as a real small miner's headlight would be on the miner's head. But this is on the front of a car, and it's very bright. The problem about this car, when you got home and you turned your gas off that this was generating, it's a self-generating lamp, it still generated acetylene gas. So you can't park this in your garage, i.e. they didn't have garages yet, but they had barns. So you wouldn't have parked this in your barn. Even if it's raining when you got home, you'd have to leave it outside. And most homes in the 1800s, virtually none, had electricity. So you would still, again, take your bale handle off the back of your car, which is full of kerosene in the bottom of this, and you would still have illumination, and you would just take this in your house, and you could put it on your fireplace, and you'd have lights.
Okay. Interesting.
So that's why it's got the bale handle, and that's what that procedure is.
And so this car is using more than one lighting technology on one car.
And these are also kerosene.
Okay.
So your marker lights are kerosene. And they even knew back 125 years ago that both sides of the lamp are a different color, like a boat. So I don't know if the boat started doing it first, or I guess they did. But so cars adopted that too. Well, this is an 1898 car. You know, these cars were made from 1897 to 1901, so we're calling it 1898, and it's VCC dated. And most of the parts are 1897, but the straight up steering column, or the angled steering column, is 1901. So that's the range of our car, 1898 to 1901. Here's a car horn. So this was developed, at the beginning when they started making this car. So it's 125 years old or so. See if you can hear a 125-year-old car horn. Boy, they can mark that off. Car horn, design. That's done. It's amazing for the first car horn to be as loud as a modern car.
Incredibly sharp and loud sound. Yeah, absolutely.
The engine is under the hood back here.
Okay.
And this is a single-cylinder motor, about 1400 cc's with pretty good compression. It's also a poppet valve motor, so to pull it through takes a big effort to pull through. So this crank start is not engaged now.
Okay.
If I pull the lever up on the side,
Yep.
then I can engage it.
Wow.
And I can crank it. It's not easy.
Apparently.
It just so I think they probably push started them. I think we're going to push start it.
Okay.
But it does crank start.
Okay.
And the problem is half the time when you use the hand crank, if you're really bold and you do start it that way, the hand crank continues to go around.
Oh.
And then if you can reach back here and flip the lever, you can make it stop. But in the meantime, you have 6 horsepower of crank flying around.
And it's pretty hard to reach that crank or that lever down there while that crank is spinning.
Yep. Well, this car is considered a total loss oiling system and then some. Because it's got a single cylinder engine. Instead of straight up and down like it would be on a motorcycle, it's laying on this side. So the crank pins on both sides have an oiler spigot on them, and a couple other spots, and in the center of the bore of the cylinder there's oil. So the way you get the oil there, you fill this little tank which holds about 1.5 quarts, and this is enough for about 40 miles. And the reason I said total loss and then some, all the oil leaves, and some of it leaves before a revolution of the engine even, because it just slides out. So
Wow.
when you start the engine, before you start it, you open up the oilers on your drippers. And these drippers now allow oil to pass, and it puts the oil where it needs to be.
Yeah.
So it'd be a good idea also, before you started the engine, to let your drippers run a minute or so the lines are full of oil.
Mm-hmm.
All it's going to do is make a bigger mess, but that's a mess is better than it seizing up.
Right.
And that's the entire oiling system. Total loss means it is one time only. So 40 miles is how far you can go,
It's
and
all
you fill
gone.
it up again.
Okay.
And then you have your gauges on the side. So you can see in here the glass gauge. So you know that we have about 1/4 of a tank of oil. So that's 10 miles we can travel right now.
And this is an air-cooled engine, or is it liquid-cooled?
Oh, this is a liquid-cooled engine.
Really?
It's got a centrifugal water pump in the front. And I'm glad you asked, because as it's running,
Oh my goodness.
the centrifugal pump pumps the water to the front of the car.
Okay.
And this front of the car, it goes into this tank like your water cooler might have.
Looks like a trough.
Like a trough.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's your radiator fins, and that's what cools it.
Oh my goodness.
And your centrifugal pump takes that cool, nice, cooled water and puts it back into the engine again. So then if you ever need to put more water in, you just pour the water in your trough.
This is the water piping here. I see these 2 red hoses and there's the pump that's pumping the water back and forth.
And that's what keeps it cool. And I've got 1,000 miles on the car, so the trough works. And when we get it running, you'll see oil, you'll see water coming from that. That spigot will be turned on.
Just speaking of having this car, when did you begin the ownership experience of this car?
Oh, about 10 years ago.
Okay.
You know, with my line of thinking, I want the oldest examples of anything I can find. This is the oldest 4-wheel vehicle in North America, probably. You know, whether it's dated 1898 or 1900, it's extremely old for a production vehicle running on fuel.
Yes.
So it will run on gasoline.
Where did you find it?
It was in Colorado. The collector there got it, and then got it from the person that had it in the 50s at the actual factory, the Jean Perrin factory, which is a half mile from the Swiss border in France. This is the last one of the remaining ones at the chateau. There's another one in a museum in Switzerland, but this one was the one that the owner kept.
Okay.
The owner / inventor. The owner and inventor in 1893, 1894, it was two brothers, the Jean Perrin brothers, and they were making spur gears for clock towers. So for the old castles and the old churches, those giant 20-foot clocks, they made giant spur gears. Wow. So that's what they were making. And then by making those gears, they designed a 3-speed transmission. So the 3-speed transmission will show in a little while, but all the gears are under the seat and there's no housing for them. They're open spur gears and they spin freely in the wind, and you engage those because you have a 3-speed shifter on the column like a 50s Chevrolet might have, and it's even pretty quiet going down the road. And going down the road, you can go 40, 45 mile an hour, and it's pretty quiet. As far as the transmission's concerned, it's pretty neat to have one of the oldest cars in the world and to never have any oil in transmission its whole life and still be nice and quiet, and they still work just fine.
And you said you've driven it about 1,000 miles since
Yes.
you've owned it?
Yeah, I've driven it in Sholo quite a bit. We've taken it back to London to Brighton in England to get the VCC certification for the dating, and it is VCC certified. I haven't mounted that yet, but there's my VCC certification. I'll put that on.
Okay.
So that just shows it's a real car. And the car, the bodywork, there's no metal on it. This is all wood.
Really?
And the car was made as the cars of the day, which is a Vis-a-Vis Carriage. All the automobiles of the day from 1896 to 1900 were made in the form of Vis-a-Vis carriages.
Vis-a-vis meaning face to face.
Right. And they made them this way because the politicians said if you made a car, it better look like something that a horse would not get scared of. So a horse is used to pulling a Vis-a-Vis carriage. Okay. So even big brands like Fiat and Peugeot and Didion, big brands, or at least they weren't then, but they became that, they all make cars similar to this same style.
Interesting.
So if you ever see a car this style, and it's a real car, it's going to be an 1890, it's going to be before 1900 car, automobile. And then the politics changed and you could make a car look like whatever you wanted to make it look like. But before 1900 in Europe, they were Vis-a-Vis carriages, basically.
Interesting. Well, we're learning again on this channel. Okay, tell me about the instrumentation on this car.
Well, driving controls, this one's got a steering wheel. So this one would be 1898 to 1901. The ones prior to 1898 would be a tiller, but a very high quality tiller. Would be basically a straight shaft with two handles on it, and you'd move those handles back and forth, but it would not have an actual gripping steering wheel.
Okay.
And then in 1898 and 1899, the steering wheel that it had and the steering column would have been straight up and down.
Okay. So
this one started life with a steering column straight up and down, but since the inventor owned the car and he could change it as he wanted to, he changed it to a super racy raked steering column in 1901.
It's the privilege of being the owner-inventor, right?
So this one's got a 1901 steering column, a Jean Perrin. He made those, and he put it on because it was a better thing. He could reach it easier. Right. He could relax more in the seat and feel a lot more like a race car that way. But then my VCC dating instead of 1898 is 1901 or so because of the angle of the steering column. You have a clock, and then because people were scared back then, they had this St. Christopher medal. So this has got a St. Christopher medal for transportation. That was your good luck charm.
Okay.
Because you're a hell-fighting fighter because you're in an automobile. You're going 30 or 40 mile an hour, and if you had a tractor that was steam or coal, you're going a couple miles an hour. Now you can go 10 times faster than that in this thing. They also had a rule back then that if you had an automobile, you're going to encounter people that you're going to run into. So since you're going to run into them, it's your responsibility to fix them.
Oh.
There's no ambulances yet, and there's no doctors besides one of carriages, so they required you for a couple years to carry an Undertaker Kit.
Are you kidding me?
Because if you had an Undertaker Kit with you, you could repair the people that you ran over. and you could fix them.
Oh, that's
Not that you knew how to operate this any better than you could operate your automobile, but you had the mandatory kit, and you could fix the people that you ran into.
That's wild.
It's like flying to Alaska. You're required to carry a rifle for the bears, and that's just a few years ago. Back then, you carried this.
Now, it looks like you have a storage box here. Is that right?
Yes. You could go to Home Depot, and you could put your rags and your stuff in there. So you had some storage, not a bunch, but you had some.
Yep.
I have some junk in there.
Yep. Okay. It's still functioning today. How did this shifter operate?
It's a progressive.
Okay.
So progressive, it's in neutral right now.
Okay.
If I want to go up here, I'm in first. I pull through neutral, that's second.
Okay.
I pull through second, I get to third.
I see.
And it does not have a reverse gear up here. Okay. But it has reverse. You pull this lever in and you have a reverse.
Now, will it reverse from any gear that it happens to be in?
I have 3 reverse gears and I have 3 forward gears. Well, if there's a car in a town, say, and it's the very beginning of cars, if there's one car. If there's 2, no matter how far they are apart, they're going to race. Maybe as quick as they can get to each other, they're going to race. But if there's 3, there's a car club. So this is an 1898, that's what we're calling the car.
Okay.
And so this is a car badge from a car club in 1898 in France.
There was a car club in 1898.
A fancier car club insignia, pin, badge, whatever you might call it, than they even have today. And that's an 1898 mounted on the car. So that just, you would just never dream that there would be a car club that early when there's not any cars yet. Hardly. This is a Vis-a-Vis Carriage. So all of the suspension is Carriage. Leaf springs. No shocks of any kind. It's exactly the same as if a horse was pulling it and it was a Vis-a-Vis Carriage, i.e. face-to-face. So there's virtually no difference. And then they didn't want the horses to be spooked, so all the cars were of that design, and the suspension was that same Carriage.
Okay. Now, how about the braking system? How did that work?
The braking system is great. You have asbestos discs that are square discs, and they're wrapped around the drum on one side, and there's 2 steel cables around those asbestos pieces. And as you put on the brakes, you're tightening up those asbestos pieces on your steel drum, and it stops just fine. And asbestos is a beautiful material because no matter how much oil you put on asbestos, it doesn't glaze. It still stops fine even with lots of oil. So asbestos was a beautiful material to make those brakes out of. And they're still on there today and they work perfect.
Interesting. Okay. And one last thing I want to show related to the undercarriage today is the gear on this one wheel.
That's a speedometer. And the speedometer that we're using on the car is a really, really new speedometer. It's 1903.
Oh, wow. So this may have been an aftermarket upgrade.
Yeah, it was. But you have to know how fast you're going. And then your lenses on this side. It's a 60-mile-an-hour speedometer.
Okay.
And so they were still in business in 1903. So I'm sure that they would have a speedometer on it.
Yeah, it was a very understandable accessory on this car, or even standard equipment at one point, I guess. Okay, here we're getting a better shot of your reverse lever for the transmission.
Okay, and also you're seeing here, this is your timing, so you can adjust your timing.
Okay.
For advance and retard. And then this is your turning your mag on, which means actually not shunting it. And it's got a car key. You would pull your key off, and that's your key.
Oh, wow.
And nobody would be having this key.
No.
So they couldn't start your car because they don't even know how a car starts to begin with. And when you're ready to go back on your trip, you put the key back in the slot like you do today. You trip it over to the off, and then you flip it over to the on when you're ready to start.
Right. Wow.
And that's your key.
Wow. And what is this down here?
That's your main kill switch for your power, for your
Okay.
dry cells, so your dry cells don't go bad.
I see.
And then if something would really happen and you're really racing along and all of a sudden you turned it upside down and you couldn't reach the controls to ride it, but you want the engine to stop, you would simply reach down right here and you'd pull this out, and that's your brake.
Oh,
So that would take your ignition away so it didn't run anymore. It's your last resort kill switch.
got you. And now there's 2 buttons and a couple pedals on the floor here. Why don't you tell me about
Yep.
those?
Well, as in most of the cars that we've been doing, the throttle is in the center,
Okay,
and then the brake and clutch are on the normal sides.
okay. And then you have a bell. Is that a bell button in the middle back there?
Yeah, this is a...
You get such a satisfied look on your face.
It still beams.
That's
Didn't
wonderful.
fall off yet.
That's right. So, and you said this is an accelerator, but it's not a pedal. It's like a button almost, right? But
Yeah, well, it's
the
a pedal.
Okay. All right. And so the clutch is on the left and the brake is on the right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. Now, what is this for?
That's your lockout for reverse.
Oh, it's okay.
So you
so
pull
have
the lever
handle.
up, then you pull this back, and it stays in reverse.
Okay.
Otherwise, you can engage for reverse for a short period of time.
Okay. So you
So
just do a quick reverse, or you're actually going somewhere.
If you're
backwards.
going to back up a big, long hill, you
Yeah.
can lock it in reverse, but it has nothing to do with your transmission levers up here other than you're in neutral up here.
Okay.
But you have different gears in reverse. You have first, second, and third in reverse. And maybe you weren't supposed to use first, second, third. Maybe you're supposed to just use first in reverse. Makes more sense. You're not putting
Right.
so much strain on it.
Right.
And how fast you're going to drive a completely wooden carriage backwards anyway.
Well, you know what might be handy though? You could be getting on the opposite seat, looking the other way, and
I don't know.
and have a rear steer.
Well, you could just sit here and you're right. You could. You could.
I'm being a little too creative, I think. Okay, very good. And obviously, we're seeing the chain drive.
Yep.
Is there a differential on this?
There is a differential inside the hub.
Okay.
So you can steer with it without it dragging one of the tires around.
Okay.
So it is an automobile with a differential.
You gonna pop the hood back here for
Yep.
us?
So engine's back here. Like a Porsche, it's water cooled, a new one.
Okay, right. And
And the water cooling is, as we showed, is in the front. So that's the engine. One thing of note, this is a performance engine. So this engine has got a poppet valve in it. So this poppet valve means it has no camshaft operating the intake valve. It's got a camshaft operating the exhaust valve,
Okay.
but not on the intake.
Okay.
So what opens the intake valve is the downward stroke of the piston that opens up the intake valve.
Does literally like cause vacuum suction to open
It's
it?
a suction thing.
Okay.
That's what a poppet valve really means.
Okay.
And because this was a racing car, because he lived really close to Mr. Peugeot, they did their own racing, and the Jean Perrin's on my book says they won 3 weekends in a row. You have this wedge, and this wedge is operating on a centrifugal advance with no RPM. This wedge is just pushing on here a bare amount. And as soon as it starts running, this wedge goes underneath the valve. So when it's at high RPM, the valve is opening a lot, and low RPM, it's opening up very little.
Wow.
So they were even thinking about racing then. And then the water pump, you can see down there, the water pump is a beautiful centrifugal water pump, and it's got basically a phenolic round non-tooth gear that's riding on the flywheel, and that's what's spinning the water pump. That's what that red is right there. And you can kind of see your gears in the transmission here. That's the transmission gears. That's the make and break.
Okay.
So the make and break will turn on the coil, the multi vibrator coil. And when we start it, we're going to open this petcock. There's not a choke, and we're going to prime the engine,
That's wild.
and then we'll start it.
This is the head of the engine, right?
That's
here.
the head,
Yeah.
and that's why the oil has no place to stay. It just throws it out.
Right. He's just hoping and praying that that oil is getting somewhere useful along the way.
Yep. And the oil is good for a second, and then it's on the ground.
Okay. And now lastly, what are those gears on the left back there? Do you see them right here?
That's for the centrifugal advance for the wedge that goes under the intake valve.
It's connected to that. Okay.
Again, this is somewhat science fair project, somewhat manufactured production automobile.
Right. Yeah. I thank you for the explanation. I would have not known anything that I'm looking at there.
What you do when you start the car is we're going to prime it because we don't have a choke.
Okay.
So we have a petcock on the head. So we're going to pour a little fuel in there. So now we have primed it. Now it's gone. So now it's primed. I'm going to make sure that the car really thinks it's in neutral. It is. The next thing, I'm going to turn the oil on. So when I pull this lever up, it pushes this down, which engages the oil. So now we should see dripping.
Yep, I see it dripping there. Okay, good.
We're going to turn the key to the on position.
Mm-hmm.
And for this time I'm going to hit the electric start.
It has a pretty fast steering gear.
Yeah.
Coming almost from a stop in second gear in a one-cylinder 1898 car. Pretty amazing.
No one in the world had a car, you could be doing this. What feeling would that have been when no one had one?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it would have to be just...
And it's pleasant. It's not that hard. It's not that challenging. It's pretty pleasant.
It's very pleasant. Did you really?
I can go, well, it'll go 40.
Yeah,
But the speed we're going is fine.
it's plenty fast from my point of view.